Okay, a very warm welcome to everyone this evening for the first EVA alumni talk of a new season of the series at Mind and Life Europe. So this evening, we're going to have Dr. Aizik Reebs present her work on mindfulness and refugee mental health. We started this series back in fall 2022 as a way to showcase some of the research trajectories and projects of our alumni of the European Varela Awards program. And so we heard from 4 different researchers and academics in the fall, really fascinating projects on a wide array of topics and with different methodologies. So you're welcome to go back and watch those on our YouTube channel. And we're going to start the new season now with Dr. Aizik Reebs. And so I'd like to briefly introduce Dr. Aizik Reebs, and then I will give her the floor for her presentation tonight, and then we'll have some time at the end for a discussion and questions. So Dr. Aizik Reebs is a postdoctoral fellow at the Observing Minds Lab and the Moments of Refuge project in the School of Psychological Sciences at the University of Haifa. She completed her BA and MA at the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich and her PhD in psychology at the University of Haifa. Her main research interests include the cross-cultural applications of mindfulness, the potential of mindfulness in trauma therapy, and the underlying mechanisms of action in mindfulness practice. In her dissertation research, she focused on the effects and mechanisms of a mindfulness-based trauma recovery intervention for the mental health and well-being of traumatized Eritrean refugees residing in Israel. In her postdoctoral work, she's focusing on the implementation and outcomes of an online mindfulness intervention for traumatized refugees and asylum seekers. And so her research and training, as mentioned earlier, have been supported by a European Varela Award in 2017, as well as a Minerva Fellowship from the Max Planck Institute. So with that, I will leave you the floor, Anna. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and also sharing your story on this journey in contemplative science. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, the warm introduction, and it's a real pleasure and honor to be here today. And I'll share the screen of the presentation with you. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present our research group's work on forcibly displaced people here. And as you just said, my name is Anna Aizik, and I'm currently a postdoc at the Observing Minds Lab at the University of Haifa in Israel. And in preparation for this talk, I reflected on the work that our research group has been doing over the past years, and also my personal experience of carrying out this work. And this is what I'd like to share with you today. I came to this line of research partly by chance and partly out of curiosity. And it did turn into something that I care about very much and I feel very passionate about. And I was born and raised in Munich, Germany. And 7 years ago, after completing my master's in psychology and political science, I moved to Tel Aviv, Israel to live with my now husband. And I felt I was like stranded in a strange land, and I tried to figure out what to do with my life. And I knew I wanted to do research and to pursue a PhD. And so I came across Amit Bernstein and his Observing Minds Lab at the University of Haifa. And it had just been a few months earlier in the summer of 2015 that thousands of Syrian refugees had arrived in Europe. And at the time, many of them were also arriving in my home city, Munich, were welcomed with open arms. And I also had volunteered a few years earlier with the Eritrean refugee community. So when there was an opportunity to do mental health research with refugees, it was something that immediately sparked my interest. And we spent a few months figuring out my research direction, what I would do, and decided that I would run a mindfulness-based intervention with refugees. And I thought it was really interesting and I was excited. But I also didn't quite understand all what I had signed up for. And I knew I had a lot to learn, a lot about research, a lot about working with this community. And usually when we publish or write about our work, we give limited space to the ways of how we carried out this work and how we work together with the refugee community. So part of my my talk today will focus also on that. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you, I would like to give you a sense of the lived experience of Eritrean refugees and asylum seekers in Israel. To tell you a bit about the mindfulness-based intervention we developed called MBTR, Mindfulness-Based Trauma Recovery for refugees. I'd like to share how we worked with the community and how we try to bring mindfulness into this refugee community. And then I'd like to share some outcomes and feedback from our MBTR trial study with you. So currently we live in a crisis of forced displacement. And as of today, more than 100 million people have been forcibly displaced from their homes due to persecution, natural disasters, wars. And it seems to me that every time I like write or talk about this, that the number keeps on rising. So just in a paper that we published last year, it was 82 million forcibly displaced people. And now more than 13 million Ukrainians have also been forcibly displaced, alongside with refugees from Venezuela, from Afghanistan, Syria, Ethiopia, Eritrea. And worse yet, we're probably just at the very initial stage of this crisis. So only in the last decade, the number of forcibly displaced people in the world has doubled. And most likely climate change will exacerbate this crisis. And it's been projected that between 200 million to 1 billion people will be forcibly displaced by 2050. So that's quite a number to take in, 100 million forcibly displaced people. And many times forcible displacement, it comes with stress, with trauma, with loss. And also because of that has led to a global mental health crisis. So conflict, persecution, and everything that's involved in forced displacement contributes to the development of post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, and also suicidality. It also puts a lot of stress and pressure on community and contributes to the risk for intimate partner violence, gender-based violence, and the intergenerational transmission of trauma and stress to children. It's a global phenomena, but it's also a local phenomena. So beginning in 2006, forcibly displaced children and adults from Eritrea and Sudan began to seek refuge in Israel. They came from East Africa through Egypt to Israel. They fled a genocide and therefore a military dictatorship in Eritrea. And on their way of seeking refuge, many of them became victims of human trafficking, of torture, were kept in torture camps in Sinai, became victims of sexual and labor exploitation. And it can be very difficult to comprehend the experience of refugees and asylum seekers that live here in Israel. But I'll try to give a little bit of a voice to their experience by showing you a few quotes from interviews that have been done with refugees after they arrived to Israel. The smugglers are not interested in our lives. They are only interested in money. We were kept on the verge of dying. I did not feel as if my body was mine. I felt as if it belonged to the smugglers. We were blindfolded for 3 months. We lived in constant fear. This is Jonas, an Eritrean asylum seeker, who speaks of his experience in being a victim of human trafficking. My body is a grave. I buried my memories somewhere deep down, and I know that if I'm going to open the door, it will take me a long time to close it again. This is Abel, another Eritrean asylum seeker. So, like having these experiences in mind, it's maybe not surprising that when we first started to, as a research group, to systematically measure the mental health of refugees here in Israel, we found extraordinarily high numbers of trauma exposure, such as lack of food or water, having been sick without medical care, and experience of rape or sexual abuse, being lost or kidnapped, and more than half of this sample that we assessed here, it's a community sample, more than half of them experienced torture. And in addition, once these refugees arrive in Israel, they face a multitude of post-migration stressors. Here in Israel, refugees do not receive a safe status, and they have little access to social services and medical care. They face stresses such as separation from family. They have conflict with migration officials. They often struggle with having enough money to pay food or rent. They feel isolated in society, and they worry about having a regular place to sleep. And the trauma they carry and the post-migration stressors they face every day, they translate into mental suffering and very high rates of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And again, it's important to highlight here that this is a community sample. These are not treatment seekers. And they have really high levels of PTSD and depression. Sadly, also a large number of people in this population have suicidal ideation. They have thoughts that they would be better off dead or hurt in some ways. And in a community sample, 31% of people have suicidal ideation. As a comparison, in the Israeli population, it's about 5 to 7% in the general population. And those people that have PTSD, anxiety, or depression, they have even higher rates of suicidal ideation. So knowing about these people's experience, the numbers and data that we see, they beg the question, what can we do? Or is there something that we can do to help those refugees and to alleviate their suffering? And guided by previous research and experience with this refugee community, we theorized that mindfulness and compassion-based practices could provide one way of helping this population to heal and recover. And you may ask yourself, so why, considering all their everyday worries they have and the trauma they experience, so why would mindfulness, is that really something that could help? And the rationale is that in previous cross-sectional studies with refugees, we repeatedly found that those that had higher mindful awareness had greater resilience and greater indicators of recovery. And there's also strong evidence based for the stress buffering effects of mindfulness interventions. And there's also the practical side of it. So mindfulness interventions are group-based. They can be delivered to more people at the same time. They are relatively brief, and therefore they're more feasible and scalable. They can also be delivered by paraprofessionals and not only by psychiatrists or trained psychologists. And third, cultivating mindfulness, attention, compassion, and acceptance. These are processes that are universal and they transcend language and culture. So that's why we develop mindfulness-based trauma recovery for refugees, in short, MBTR-R. MBTR is like in terms of structure and mindfulness practices, closely resembles or is closely related to established mindfulness interventions such as MBCT and MBSR. There's also an emphasis on psychoeducation with a focus on trauma and stress reactions. There's a whole session dedicated to compassion and loving kindness and compassion practices. And it's also trauma sensitive with trauma sensitive adaptations to ensure that it's also safe for the most vulnerable and traumatized refugees. So the intervention has 9 sessions delivered over 9 weeks that are 2.5 hours long, and also home practices that we supported with a YouTube channel where we recorded practices in participants' mother tongue. And the intervention also includes specific trauma-sensitive practices such as a safe place practice and window of tolerance. Now I'll share a little bit more about a both very interesting but also challenging part of the work, and that is bringing mindfulness to a refugee community, like how to implement this kind of mindfulness intervention. And it's a process that for me started with getting to know this community, with assembling and training a team to carry out the study and the intervention, to create a safe space to deliver the intervention, and also a process or like a of everyone involved in carrying out the study to embody mindfulness, to embody the intentions and attitudes of mindfulness practice. So I'll tell you a little more in detail what I mean by that. So first, this first step for me was getting to know this community. And I was really lucky that there was a senior PhD student in our lab, Kim Yuval, who is a human rights activist and who already had several years of experience in working with this community, working with NGOs that support refugees. And he managed all the logistics of the study and project and shared his invaluable knowledge and understanding with me. And I also started to volunteer in a local NGO that provides psychosocial services for refugees. And for 5 years, for about 5 years, I volunteered there for 5 hours a week. And refugees would come in and they would share their stories and struggles. They would talk about their difficulty to find a place to sleep, to have work accidents and trying to get legal compensation. And they talked about the trauma they had experienced. And I encountered many situations where I couldn't provide any practical help. And I couldn't give people the concrete help they were looking for or solve their problems. And what we could give was limited. And all I could do many times was listen, was be with them with their difficulties, to show empathy. And I learned a lot about the community, their lives, their custom, their religion. And then as a next step, we built and trained a team and to carry out the study and to deliver the intervention. And we very soon learned that the team is probably one of the most important element of such a project. And in our team, half of the team were Eritrean asylum seekers. Their role was to translate, but really not only that, they were involved in every step of the process. So from when we develop the materials, from recruitment to screening, assessment, we work together with them. They helped us develop all the materials. We conducted cognitive interviews to ensure that the way we translate things and convey them is clear and in line with their culture. They really mediated the community to us. They became like a voice of the project. And that kind of process of mediation is something that is ongoing. Like throughout the whole project, we had ongoing supervision and training, and worked very closely together with members of that community. Another important aspect was to create a safe space for these refugees. So refugees live a very uncertain life reality here in Israel. Changing governments have threatened to deport them back to Africa. There's a sense that their visa status or working permits could be revoked at any moment. And this is why it was important for us to create a sense that there's a safe space for them, and the intervention is delivered in such a safe space in the heart of the refugee community, where many of them live. And we were cooperating with a really inspiring NGO called Kuchinate. It's an African women's collective that serves as a rehabilitation center for women. They make beautiful art products there. And we were running the study and delivering the group sessions there. And we had babysitters and childcare for the women whenever we had groups. We also had community members cook food for us that we shared. So we shared a meal together of traditional Eritrean food, injera, really delicious. And so we try to provide that kind of sense that there is a safe space for them. And that also relates to another point of working with the community of actually embodying mindfulness. So the participants experience the attitudes and intentions of mindfulness practice and mindful living, not only during the mindfulness sessions and the formal meditation practice, but they also experienced it in the way that our research team and the community mediators and the intervention instructors embody openness and acceptance for their experience, and curiosity and non-judgment for their culture and customs, and also compassion for their struggles. We also had a variety of obstacles that we experienced when carrying out that project and study. One of them, the unstable political situation here. And so just at the time when we were running the study, there'd been a new law that refugees are being deported back to third countries in Africa, like Rwanda and Uganda. And some asylum seekers were leaving, and others were worrying that they would lose, that they would have to leave. And in this kind of unstable situation, it was difficult to track or to assess people over a longer period of time. And because Israel doesn't give a safe status to refugees, there's also a lot of refugees are leaving. And for instance, all of our Eritrean team members from the study, they're all not living in Israel anymore. They all were resettled to another country. And that makes research or doing assessments with them over a longer period of time more challenging. Also, many of the refugees here in Israel work long hours, they have multiple jobs, and they have limited time to commit to assessments and to a group. And there's also a certain stigma around mental health, and only a now more growing notion that there's maybe a need to take care of mental health, or mental health issues are not only for people who are crazy. So that was sort of something we worked with to communicate really clearly what we are offering, how stress is part of life and living, and how broad, like a broad part of the community can benefit from the program we're offering. And this also relates to expectations that many times people wanted more concrete practical help and what we could offer. And so also there, it was important to communicate around this very clearly. So yeah, this were some of the obstacles we faced. And now I'll share a little bit more with you about the study itself. We set out to deliver the intervention and to test its feasibility, its efficacy, safety, and mechanisms of action. And we recruited and randomized 158 Eritrean asylum seekers over the course of 1 year, women and men. And they were either randomized to the intervention or to a waitlist control condition. And we conducted a wide range of assessments at 21 time points before the intervention, during the intervention, and also following the intervention. And yeah, we worked really hard to retain 86% of those people of the sample. And I'll share now a little bit more with you about the outcomes, about the findings that we had. And so we had really promising and exciting findings in relation to improvements in mental health. So we found that although almost all of the asylum seekers in the waitlist control condition still had PTSD following the study, less than half of the participants who received mindfulness and still struggled with PTSD after the intervention. And even among those 48% here that still met diagnostic criteria for PTSD, the large majority showed reductions in the severity of their symptoms. And these effects were largely maintained at follow-up. And we saw very similar effects for depression, for anxiety disorder, for multimorbidity, and also we observed elevations in subjective well-being. We also saw a preventive effect on suicidal ideation. So participants of MBTR, of those who received mindfulness and compassion training, were less likely to develop suicidal ideation than those in the control condition. Yet, we also saw that there was, in contrast to this very encouraging preventive effect, MBTR, the intervention, did not reduce pre-existing suicidal ideation. So even among those people who benefited therapeutically, who had reductions in depression or PTSD and anxiety, it did not necessarily reduce suicidal ideation. So beyond studying the outcomes of the intervention, we also looked at mechanisms of action. So we wanted to not only understand whether, quote unquote, the intervention worked, we also wanted to understand how the intervention worked. And whether those things we specifically targeted in the intervention also brought about the therapeutic effects. So one thing we were interested in, just one of many mechanisms or several mechanisms we looked at, is self-referential processing. And we looked at self-compassion and self-criticism. And we measured self-compassion and self-criticism with a behavioral task, where we had self-referential audio stimuli that closely simulate thinking, and where people didn't have to read, they could listen to it. And then this behavioral task also gave us the option to apply diffusion modeling and to sort of more look at the cognitive processes that underlie self-criticism and self-compassion. And what we found here is that cultivating self-compassion and reducing self-criticism helped to mediate the therapeutic effects of the intervention, of the mindfulness intervention on PTSD and depression. So higher self-compassion and lower self-criticism was partly accounting for the therapeutic effects of MBTR. Beyond further understanding mechanism of action of MBTR, we also developed a brief online version of MBTR. So we have a mobile mindfulness-based mental health intervention that is called Mindfulness SOS. And this program synthesizes the key principles and practices from MBTR. It has a focus on stress buffering effects. It has very brief sessions and practices, and asylum seekers can listen to it on their phone as frequently as they wish to, anytime, wherever they are. It's available on our website, momentsofrefuge.com. And we now have it in English, we have it in Arabic, we have it in Tigrinya, in the mother tongue of Eritreans, and we have it now also in Ukrainian and Russian. And currently we are running another randomized controlled trial on Mindfulness SOS, on this mobile online intervention with Eritrean refugees. And what we're doing there is we are testing a stepped care approach. So it's a sequential multiple assignment randomized trial, a SMART design. That means that after participants have either been randomized to waitlist control or to the online intervention, after a few weeks into using the intervention, they are, based on their engagement with the online program and their response to it, they're randomized again to either a condition with minimal support or with more intensive guidance and support that we provide to them over the phone. And based on participants' feedback from earlier studies and also from our experience with this community, here we are focusing in measurement more on families, on community and child outcomes. And one thing we'd like to understand is whether mindfulness can impact the intergenerational transmission of trauma. So in addition to showing you the outcomes of the data we collected in the study, I'd also like to share with you some of the voices of the participants and their personal experience with our mindfulness program. So one of the participants shared with us that the program changed my view towards myself. Now I think about myself differently, that I'm not alone struggling in this life. I understand now that difficulties are part of living, and also it gave me hope. And another one shared, My husband told me that I'm having less nightmares during the night than before the training. I was screaming during the night and leaving the house sometimes, but now I'm not doing that anymore. And finally, I'd like to share Mogu's video. I hope you can all see and hear this. It's a small video clip. Wait a second. I think I need to stop share. Sorry. And go to this. Okay. No. I'm sorry, I'm figuring out why I cannot show you the video. Okay, I think now it should work.
You want to try again, Anna? We can't hear you. And we just saw the blank screen at the moment. Take your time if you need to find the video again.
We refugees here were facing a lot of problems, especially with the deportation. It is the mind that gets me crazy, that gets me to depressed, because all the time thinking things, I'm addicted to it. I don't know how to stop it. When I stop it, I got peace. When I not know to stop it, I got crazy or I depressed. It's some like after you meditate, you become like new person. And then after so many hours, you get back where you have been. It's obvious, but for some more 4 minutes, you become someone very new. I hope so it will be distributed to all of the people and to become part of the refugee system. And it's like a medicine for me, maybe a luxury for you. It's like a medicine for me. It's a different way of interpretation for it. I use it for like a medicine.
This was Mogu's feedback. And it may be a luxury for you, but it's like a medicine for me. So I'd like to close this presentation by saying how thankful I am to be part of this team that carried out this work, and to say a big thank you to everyone who helped make this happen, from our community mediators, from everyone, the inspiring women at Cucinette that hosted us, our research team, psychiatrists, the lab manager, and everyone else who was involved. And thank you for your patience and kindness for listening today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this at once heartfelt and really sharp and insightful presentation, real window onto your work. And now I think we have ample time for discussion. So since we're a nice small group, you're welcome just to come forward and ask a question or make a comment or a reflection. We can make this just a free-flowing dialogue. So feel free, if you already have something on the top of your mind, don't hesitate, just unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand. Or if you do prefer, you can also just write it into the chat and we can articulate it for you if you're unable to unmute yourself. And it usually takes a couple minutes for people to come up with the thought. Yeah, Ruben, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Anna. This is very moving and very important work. No, it's very impressive. Thanks so much for sharing. Just a few thoughts about the clip that you showed. It could be turned into a small documentary as well. That would be nice. I think that would be a way of maybe making the work more.
Yeah, actually, the clip is part of a documentary. So there is a documentary called My Year of Living Mindfully. Mm-hmm. And it's an Australian journalist that traveled to talk with different researchers and different groups. Maybe you've seen the movie? No? And she was looking for a group that does work that is like very applied and I guess not the typical target group for mindfulness intervention. So that's how she came across our group, and she traveled to Tel Aviv and she filmed us during the study. So that's what you see. These are like, there was like a short snippet of our participants, and Mogu was one of the participants that she interviewed a bit more in depth. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. What's the name of the documentary again?
It's called My Year of Living Mindfully.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happily. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Derek, for providing the link.
Yeah.
Yep, other friends.
Hi, this is very inspiring because it shows in statistical terms and with a full team the kinds of things that we should be doing here in Italy, but very few are doing with the refugee community. So it would be interesting to see how to do what we've focused on are the very things that your team could not do, the housing, the job training kind of thing, and trying to raise funds to help in those ways. And then that provides some motivation for people then to engage with mental health improvement approaches. And so we're working on that too. So this is really very, very good. Has this been published?
Yes, yeah, we have several papers that have been published on this, both on the outcomes, also on the mechanisms, on self-compassion and self-criticism. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think it's very interesting what you're saying about, yeah, people, when people have such pressing everyday struggles, it's very difficult for them to engage in something, even though it could provide a relief. It's very hard to find the motivation, the time, the mental space to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, there have to be different factors of motivation. And we even had some difficulty with, even though, you know, to get a job, you have to speak the language. And yet a lot of the refugees were resisting attending language classes, you know, and now they're discovering that without a driver's license, without the language, without certificates, you can't really work in Europe. So it's been a very, very uphill battle trying to convince everyone to, you know, that you're, you know, if you're going to stay, you're going to work on your documents. There are a number of steps that you have to go through, but we're trying to get that message out, although it's now 7 years into a process here. And it's been very challenging. But we did some mindfulness programs also, some workshops and that kind of thing. So thank you very much for making a systematic presentation of what we've been doing, kind of, as in America, we say, by the seat of our pants.
Oh, happily. Thank you.
And Anna, would you be willing to share the links to those papers that you mentioned? Because that might be interesting also to share with people who are at least attending tonight and might also.
Yeah, happily. It's also always very interesting to hear how work with other refugee communities in the world is going, because it's sort of not a, I try to emphasize it in a way, it's not a one size fit all story. Like I believe that with every community, there comes different needs, there come different struggles that ask for different adaptations, for different kind of work. So yeah, it's always really interesting to hear how that is in other communities, refugee communities in the world. Yeah.
Feel free if there's other. Yeah, Ruben, please go ahead, step in. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. No, and I just one more question about the cross-cultural understandings of mental health. Is there, like, was that an issue at any point, like different understandings, like for example this PTSD, right? Like it's not a notion that is that travels necessarily well across cultures, so just wondering what is.
Yes, yeah, that is a very important point. There's different, in different cultures, there are different understandings of mental health and also of trauma, of stress. And for instance, with our participants, we did use, in terms of questionnaires, we did use an adapted version. There's an adapted version of cultural specific idioms for PTSD in for East African refugees. And one thing that I remember from it is also that it relates to different bodily symptoms. So for instance, our participants would say, I have a headache, and it doesn't only relate to having a headache as in, it's more than that. It's like having a lot on my mind, feeling stressed. And yeah, so there was a different way of expressing mental health issues. And yeah, it's definitely was like a process of like understanding each other. Like, what do we mean with all those measurements that we have and that we're trying to measure, and how do people in this community understand those concepts? And yeah, and it's like a lot of our work has been a back and forth and an ongoing dialogue around us. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other good examples. I think another thing that we noticed that many times for people, the trauma, especially for the women, the trauma was in the body. So it's not only in the mind, it's in the way that, yeah, it's embodied over time. And the way they talk about physical, like somatic symptoms, and yeah, it's something that manifested itself there too. And maybe another issue that I would say is not only the understanding around things like PTSD, but also to understand that or to relate to mental health. That's something that we all sort of struggle with to varying degrees in our lives. And to have stress or experience stress is not anybody's fault, or doesn't make them crazy. There's a word that they sometimes use. We get people that said, do you think I'm crazy? Why do you tell me about this? And we try to say, no, everybody has stress in varying degrees, has little and big catastrophes in their life. And everybody can benefit from more awareness or more space to process them. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thanks, Emil. And I would have a follow-up, but I don't want to take too much. So, just in terms of, you mentioned this dialogue. I mean, it sounds all great. I just was wondering to what extent the Western knowledge, mindfulness has much more, let's say, credibility than local understandings, right? So to what extent this dialogue is one-sided or is a little bit skewed towards Western medicine, mindfulness, if you know what I mean. It's like, to what extent are we also or kind of mindfulness is also learning from these communities? I suppose that would be my question.
How do we learn from this community?
In terms of informing the mindfulness scholarship as well, right? Like, so it's not only these communities learning from mindfulness, but also perhaps.
Yeah, how are we learning from the community? So I think I'm trying to we had like weekly meetings with our mindfulness instructors every week when we conducted the groups, and one of the things that they found challenging, or that sort of like, I'm not sure if that is exactly what you mean, but where I think they adapted to that community or we learned from them was also in the way that we do inquiry, for instance. Like in their culture, there's someone who teaches and you listen. You don't necessarily ask questions and share your experience. And to find ways to involve them, or also to maybe accept that an integral part of many mindfulness-based programs is talking about the experience and sharing, and how to facilitate that or to empower people to do this. This was like a challenge, or I think where we learned that it's different with this community. And we also learned something about practices that, for instance, for many of them, closing their eyes or laying down is very triggering. So we tried to give much more choice. We saw that, especially for the women, the mindful movement wasn't really a relief. It was sometimes also, it needed to be very, very gentle. Because as I said, the trauma also was often in the body. We learned a lot about, we learned something about their culture in terms of hospitality, and a lot of them related to the working with, we had a guest metaphor that really resonated with many of them. We have a safe place practice where we sort of learned that we need much more like explanation about what can be a safe place, that it can be, you can find safety within yourself, in your own body, in your own mind. It doesn't have to be a physical place. And yeah, so I think there were like sort of subtle adaptations that happened. Yeah, that informed the practice, the way we structured the sessions related to each other. Is this answering? Is this going? What do you?
Great. No, that's very interesting. No, thanks so much for sharing. That's very, very insightful.
Thanks, Ruben. That's a great question. Actually, that was something I was thinking about during the talk as well. This idea of importing mindfulness to something to a context which may, not find it to be the most natural of solutions, which is sort of an interesting point in terms of how to design a research project in that particular context. Gabor, I see you wanted to ask a question too.
Yes, I would like to ask a more personal question from Anna. You received the EVA award in 2016, and you shared the outcomes, the results with us. And I would be curious to hear about your journey throughout the project. How was it for you? Did you face any challenges, difficulties? What were they? What type they were? And also how you would describe the journey throughout the research project. Was it a roller coaster or was it a very smooth process? And what were the main issues and challenges throughout the whole process? You worked with an impressive team and a great number of refugee participants in the program. So I can imagine that you had some challenges.
Yeah,
during
yes.
the
Yeah, I think to begin with, we sort of when I started out in 2016, I first went to the Mind and Life conference, and we made everything from scratch. So that means we developed the intervention. We decided on all the measurements. We had to translate them. We had to build a team, figure out a lot of logistics. So I would say that I felt on one hand I enjoyed that because I was part of the entire process, but it also it came with like a lot of like learning that and a lot of things I'd never done before, and felt like okay, how I'm going to figure out all of this, or also in the beginning with a lot of maybe doubt and worry, would that really be suitable for this community? How would they react? Would we find participants? I remember that apprehension at the very first group session. Will they actually show up? And then how will they receive it? And so I think that we built this from scratch, and also in a long preparation phase, I felt like part of it was a bit of a lonely process. I think that research often is for PhD students, of like reading a lot, trying to get together those materials, and then it took something like 2 years to prepare all of it, and it also was stressful to work in this context where there are a lot of changes and you need to be very flexible. Like stressful from, as I alluded to, there's a really unstable political situation. So people were leaving because refugees were leaving the country because they were threatened to be deported. And we see that now too. It's a shrinking community. So the questions of would we be able to recruit enough people? And then also, of course, a lot of excitement and pride with like building it and making it happen. And I think one of the things that for me was the most rewarding was some of the personal interactions that we had. Like we had a great team, and that also our trained team members. It was really like moving also to see how much some of them identified with this and became like a voice for this program in their community. And we built friendships, and it was just really fun and nice to work together. And to meet the participants was really, and to meet their children. They would come and we dropped them off with our babysitters. And I think that was something that was, that was really the rewarding part. I'll also add to it, with what was a lot of work, it's really working in a context where, I put a picture there of the buildings. It's really not a nice neighborhood. And we came into this NGO, moved like furnitures, and went out there in the evenings, but together, because there would be drug dealers on one side, and it is a sketchy neighborhood to work in. And there was also situations where people were maybe irritated sometimes, or they were triggered by some of the assessments we did. And to mediate that and to contain it, and to try to communicate around this is also a lot of stress. Yeah.
When did the project end officially?
The project ended officially in 2019.
And how is it going? How has it been going ever since? Was there any longer term sustainable effect or project developed from this seed project that you can still go?
Yes, so we had, after the project finished, we were sort of like seeing the outcomes, hearing the feedback, and we were sort of motivated to keep going. And then COVID came, and we understood that for a long time it wouldn't be able, or like it would just be very unpredictable whether we could run groups, continue to run groups. And this is when we developed Mindfulness SOS, and we developed online mindfulness program. And we ran a smaller pilot study during COVID with these refugees. And what we saw there is we saw a large, we saw an interesting preventive effect. So during COVID, when people couldn't work and their economic situation was deteriorating, those people who were in the intervention, they sort of didn't go down in their mental health. And this is why we now are continuing with that SMART study of that same online intervention. That has, where we are testing, where we're looking more on family outcomes and community outcomes, children. And yeah, we also hope in the future to maybe run another project with the groups. And yeah, so it has like an afterlife. Yeah.
It's good to hear, and that it is also an ongoing activity right now happening as we are speaking.
Yes, yeah. As we are speaking, hopefully one of our participants is listening to an intervention. Yes.
Thank you, Anna, for all your work and your colleagues. It's not easy to do these projects. I know.
Thank you.
I do see we also have a question from Derek, who cannot unmute himself right now. So we'll just read it out loud, and then feel free to respond. He asks, are there any or many other groups that have contacted you to take on and further the MBTR-R intervention? And where in the world are these groups based, if so?
Yes, so we did. We were contacted by other groups, actually by this is activity that the PI Amit Bernstein is more aware of than me, because he's usually contacted. It's been by groups that work in Greece, with refugees that came to Greece from Syria mostly. It's been also with a group in Italy, in Rome actually, and also a group in Norway that has contacted us. And I think a lot of the questions these groups had were also around the implementation and the delivery. So we have an intervention manual, but these groups also ask, okay, so how do you work with these communities, and how do you implement these kind of programs? And one of our sort of projects for the future is also to have a more systematic training on MBTR and also on implementation. So thank you for the question, Derek.
Okay. I would maybe have a question if no one else wants to jump in. I'm just curious if you've thought about the future of this work as possibly interfacing with other embodied therapeutic practices. I'm just thinking of Peter Levine's somatic experiencing, for example, which targets specifically trauma as stored in the body. And I'm wondering if that, in a way, wouldn't be a sort of complement or even a more direct conduit to this particular type of population in this particular type of context. And I'm just wondering if there was any, thought about that within your research team, or if that's maybe that would just complicate the research design so much, adding another approach in there. But I'm just wondering if you've thought about the interface of those types of more somatically oriented approaches.
Yeah, I think there's many ways in how the program could be extended, could be complemented. We didn't specifically have plans to do that so far, but I very much agree that sort of more therapeutic approaches that specifically focus on somatic symptoms, especially for traumatized population, could be really valuable. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I would need to process it a bit, actually, to think how it could fit and work with the program. Yeah.
Please come back to us if you have processed that, and if you have any further questions or comments. There's a wide network in this area that we have relationship with, and we can probably even help connecting you with some of those people. And you can also build projects that would be relevant to this area of work that MLE is also involved in. So let's keep the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you for pointing. Yeah.
Great. And Sonia, you have your hand raised.
Yeah. I was wondering, in this program, did you also work with issues around identity and sense of self? Because one of the participants, he wrote that he feels like a different person.
We didn't directly talk about identity and sense of self. I think how I understood the feedback, because this is also really because that was what commonly came up, or more participants shared, was that taking part in the program was giving them a sort of different perspective on their experience, sort of a sense of common humanity, that struggles they were facing were not their fault necessarily, that struggles are part of living, and that in that way they understood their experience and they could relate to their experience in a different way. Maybe with a bit less self-criticism, or feeling that they were alone in it. They felt they were connected to others through that shared experience of struggling or having difficulties in life.
And did they create their own groups afterwards? Because this was a 9-week intervention, wasn't it? And did they gather together on their own, or
They did not. We did, there was feedback that they would have liked us to continue some sort of practice group afterwards. And it was something that we discussed for some time, how could we make that happen? That people that finished the program would continue to maybe practice together. And I think one of the reasons why it was difficult for us to do that is that there was a lot of logistics around it, like providing the space, having someone facilitate the groups, making sure they're coming. There's been a lot of work in the background to facilitate the groups. So we at the time we felt it would be difficult to uphold such a practice group, but it was something that we were discussing.
Yeah, thanks. Great talk. It's wonderful work. I think it's great.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you.
Thanks for the great question. It's really an important facet of this work. I'm just scanning the room. If anyone else, great. Bruce, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Anna, for extremely interesting study with lots of Western psychological terms and in relation to mindfulness and compassion, terms that we in the West are familiar with as having been introduced from the Dharma by in MBSR. When you started to talk about self there and experiencing a change in the self, it occurred to me that since we're dealing with a different culture, maybe we shouldn't just be, of course, we have to interpret it for research papers in terms of the way that the study was designed based on mindfulness-based studies. But to be perfectly honest, if you strip down what is contained within these mindfulness-based programs, we have the Buddhist mindfulness component of attention, awareness to the present moment, to their present moment lived experience, which some of the practices that you talked about are giving them that opportunity. But the other huge influence, which is not necessarily appreciated, is the self-compassion. And if one takes a different definition of self-compassion as profound self-acceptance and start to look at their responses as self-acceptance of their present lived experience, then we start we've been in a position to analyze the comments that were being discussed about, where people felt that they had a different experience of themselves in the situation that they were in, as you so very nicely demonstrated. And there's another concept which drifts in and out of all sorts of societies and times and everything, which could be described as protected aloneness, where people do not feel as alone because they can connect to something bigger. Some do it through religion. You'll find that there's a basic belief that the universe is conspiring on their behalf. But in circumstances like this, it is actually an interdependent connection with other people in the same situation within their culture. And an understanding of this interdependence actually provides this feeling of protected aloneness. Yes, I am physically alone, but no, I'm not, because I'm part of a bigger picture. So just looking at all your data and maybe extracting some of the Western terms that you necessarily had to use, we can start to understand the concepts underlying your excellent program and why it is providing resilience for communities under stress. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, there's actually, I think something that I came across a few times too, that we certainly use in different cultures and also in research. Often we struggle with having different terms, use like saying similar things, and we're trying to get to the essence of it, of what is that really. And I think 4 years later, after we completed the study, we're still in a process of sort of figuring out what are certain mechanisms that were at place, what happened more on the community level, what happened in people's experience. Like it's really like it's still an ongoing process of like understanding how people from different cultures and people that participated in this program, how they related to what was offered there, and how it impacted them, their experience.
Well, essentially yours is an outcome study, and it has to be, because mindfulness-based practices were introduced into the West or into the world without any understanding of the processes or methods involved. I mean, John Kabat-Zinn came out a few years later and quite honestly said, yeah, we took the word mindfulness, but we intended it to cover a whole load of concepts within the Dharma, and we expected that people at a later stage would work out the mechanisms. Well, everybody got on with, and why did anybody accept MBSR? Because it had therapeutic benefits. So the outcomes were good, and people said, well, let's not worry about the mechanisms. Let's worry about what's going on. Let's just get on and see where we can use it, how we can use it, and how we can benefit human flourishing, which of course is a great aim. But if you want science, I mean, there is no definition. There's no theoretical definition of mindfulness. Only an operational definition, which is how you teach people to practice it. There are no reliable methods for measuring mindfulness. There are a whole lot of questionnaires, but the questionnaires were based on psychological, Western psychological theories, which people thought might or might not have something to do with the process that was being studied. So it would be very difficult for you or anybody to actually work out the processes that were involved because nobody has ever done it.
Yeah, we need to start somewhere, I guess. I mean, there's a universal problem of measuring mindfulness. Because whether they are Eritreans or they're American college students, we are like limited in the way that people can describe or relate to their experience, and we're still in a process of. There are not that many behavioral tasks or second or third person measurements for mindfulness, and yeah, I think in terms of mechanisms, yeah, it's true. We rely on Western theory about what measurements, what mechanisms there could be at play.
Well, I'm telling you, there is no theory. All right.
There's no theory.
No. Science works on the basis of two things. It wants a definition, a theoretical definition, and that allows it to test whether the processes are actually involved. There is such a mixture of parts or practices to any of these. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, for example, has a whole a mixed bag of positive emotional practices, a little bit of mindfulness, a little bit of Sufi, compassion practices like metta were all mixed in at the start, and then on top of that, it was thrown into the bag with stress reduction, and that was used as the excuse for using it. When Williams and Siegel, Teasdale tried to analyze MBSR in order to see how they could use it for psychology, they failed completely. So all they did was they banged cognitive behavioral therapy together with elements of MBSR and called it MBCT. And then they showed that worked very well for recurrent depression. But they never actually investigated the mindfulness aspect of it. They just took it as a total program. So we basically have very little theoretical basis, which was why when I suggested that, you know, we might start, if we want to start looking at a theoretical basis for it, we might need to strip away the assumptions that people have in grabbing Kabat-Zinn's operational definition. And that's why I suggested that if we started looking at attention awareness, which actually is probably the one common factor to all the different Buddhist variations. There's multiple Buddhist definitions of mindfulness, by the way. So it's very hard for contemporary mindfulness to even hang its coat on a single Buddhist one. But they all do involve attention awareness, and then there's a huge number of other factors. But if you start to look at attention awareness at the present moment as a thread, and if you start to look at the compassion aspect of the mindfulness-based practices as self-acceptance and acceptance of other people, they get, you know, ultimately profound self-acceptance where people accept themselves in the present moment. And that's a wonderful place to be, because if you can accept yourself in the present moment as you are, as many of your refugees would have to do, you are now in a position to decide which direction you would like to go in. But all the time that you're not actually either aware of the present moment because you're hankering after the past or looking for something in the future, you can't actually move on from the present moment. So it's the awareness coupled with the acceptance that actually allows one to then use the third strata of the brain, if you like, which is creativity. And creativity gives them a chance to plan their destiny. And so if you want to actually break down semi-scientifically how the mind is working, as opposed to how the practices or the outcomes are, you might want to start thinking about that lower level of attention, awareness, which is contained in the original Buddhist teachings, the Theravada, Hinayana, and then combine it with the compassion teachings of the Mahayana, which will bring you to that experience of the present moment where people can actually see the potential for change. And then you have creativity, which is often included in the Vajrayana. So you've got the three levels of Buddhism, but at the same time, you've also got the, you could see a Buddhist psychological understanding of how the mind works. And we can apply that in Western and world situations if we choose to look beyond the apparently obvious foundations of the huge mindfulness, academic mindfulness industry we've created. So it's all right. I've taken the conversation away from your quite excellent presentation and research and thrown it out there for anybody who might be listening to see if they want to come back in the future or come back to Mind and Life Europe and say, yeah, maybe this is where we should be taking.
Yeah, I was thinking that there's a ample ideas here for hypotheses we should be testing.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that one other way to think of mechanisms is, of course, to think about the things we specifically target in an intervention. So we have, we spoke about compassion, we have a session completely dedicated to compassion. And that's also one of the target mechanisms we tested. In terms of attention and awareness, I was thinking that some of our participants were sharing that they felt quite empowered by this notion of becoming aware of their experience, and instead of automatically reacting, having some choice in how they want to act. So when you're under such stress in every day, there's often little space to consciously choose. So this was also something that you were just describing or assuming. It's something that we didn't systematically measure or test, but a feedback that struck me.
No, I wouldn't expect you to have broken it down or studied like that in your study, but that is actually the basis of the how the mind works. How when these third generation cognitive behavioral practices came in. Obviously MBSR, MBCT, ACT, they all worked on the principle that you brought somebody to that moment of pause, and in that pause the potential for change, and in that potential for change was their future direction and destiny. Yes, you beautifully summed up what was going on. And thank you again for your research, because without your research, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to start to explore where we can take our understanding of how the mind works and how we can help other people to use their minds, their own minds, to flourish for themselves and make choices about their destinies. And once one person makes a change within themselves, and as Mahatma Gandhi said, you become the change you want to see in the rest of the world. And by interdependence, you change one person, and that one person then has the potential to become the change they want to see in the world, as Gandhi did. And so we move on from individual flourishing to societal flourishing, and hopefully world and planetary flourishing, and all based on what you've told us today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm also noting the time, and I noticed there were 2 comments here. One I wanted to acknowledge of Francis, that yes, also here we have that observation that they're a quite close community, and there is a lot of community resilience and support. And this is, I think, a very big source of resilience for refugees that live, for Eritrean refugees here, that they have this community.
Thank you, Father Francis, for that comment. And thank you, Bruce, for your sweeping this idea of agency too, which is important. Anna, in terms of time, we don't want to take too much of your time. We are sort of at the end of our official time. Would you be willing to take one more question, or shall we?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. How about we end with you, Ani? Would you like to unmute yourself, or you can also drop your question in the chat if that's easier?
Okay. Following Bruce's intervention, I feel I have a problem with mindfulness-based intervention, because what I see is that whatever the problem, the solution is always mindfulness. Whereas, in fact, I wonder where technically, precisely, what is the trauma specificity of what you're doing? Because I'm well informed of what's happening in the work on trauma. In the work of trauma, a lot of things are known, and mindfulness is a component of work on trauma. Whereas on your side, mindfulness is the global context. Within that, you're dealing with trauma. And that's my general disagreement or question. But I haven't heard exactly what you're doing for trauma, apart from introducing mindfulness. Because there are a lot of very effective things methods for dealing with trauma. It's a field in itself in psychotherapy. And that way myself, I've been doing some training in that. Impressive. Okay. That's
Yes.
a question.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think an important question. I also think it's important to say mindfulness is not the one and only solution for people that struggle with trauma. I think, again, there's something context dependent. So if you are an American veteran and you have access to different kind of resources to give you treatment to deal with trauma, you maybe mindfulness may not be your first go-to. So yeah, this is one answer to your question, that I think in our context, where there are almost no psychiatrists or trained psychologists available to deliver other types of treatments, like trauma exposure therapy or behavioral therapy to people, to these refugee community, and a group-based mindfulness intervention, yeah, is something that is more feasible. And the other thing is, there are in the program itself, there are components that are specific to trauma. For instance, the psychoeducation and on trauma and stress. Then part of the mindful practices that relate to uncoupling of associations and experiences. So when we train mindfulness practices, part of it is becoming aware of our experiences and our reactions to them. And many people that suffer from trauma have those automatic, for instance, triggers that evoke an automatic reaction. So people may practice mindfulness and become aware of the stress, the tension in their body that those triggers evoke, and they can they may be able over time to react differently or to process those stressors differently and to uncouple them from the maladaptive reaction.
But that's very specific. That's quite general outside of mindfulness. It's a general process. Because I have a problem with mindfulness in general. I feel it's not very effective because it's not enough precise on building the capacity to be present. It's a capacity you build, and there are methods to build that. Because mindfulness is too general for that, because, well, I'm getting too detailed. Another question I have is the body component of that, because general mindfulness is not embodied enough, really, in my opinion. Kabat-Zinn style is not embodied enough, and trauma is completely encoded in the body. So how do you deal with that dimension?
This circles back also to the question we were discussing earlier, Annie, about maybe some more specific somatic approaches, like somatic experiencing, and how maybe that could, be added on in the future.
That's it. That's part of it, yes.
As a complement or even a different approach.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to take that up again on our.
Okay. Yeah, and I also want to say that for some people, this may be a 9-week program, may be a beginning of relating to their experience differently, to process experiences differently. We know from other from practitioners and from studies, for most people it's an ongoing process, and
Yeah.
so I think depending on the person, on the trauma they experienced, yeah, this might be a relief, but not complete healing, or I'm lacking a word here, but of their trauma. So yeah, it's for some people the trauma is very much embodied, and they might need more focus on that. I also want to add, though, that what we see with this population is that the ongoing stressors they experience in their everyday life, the everyday worries, they contribute to their mental suffering just as much as the trauma. So they often had that experience they experienced trauma, and then they couldn't really arrive at a safe haven to recover. And then in the present moment, for many of them, the fact that they're struggling economically, that maybe family is in somewhere else in Africa and is endangered, or that they're separated from their children, those kind of worries take over. And to help them deal with the rumination around those worries, or helping them to find like a relief from that kind of stress, that can also be very helpful, in addition to addressing the trauma.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. Thanks, Anna, for your thoughtful way of taking in these different questions and offering perhaps different threads for the future, but also responding based really on your personal heartfelt experience. And as you say, it may be only a beginning, but it seems to be, from your research, a very robust beginning for a lot of these people, and at least the first few steps into stabilizing their experience in some respect. So I think we'll end there. We're over time. This turned out to be a very fulsome discussion. So thank you so much, Anna, once again, for sharing your project, your research, your career trajectory. It's been a real pleasure to listen to you, your story, and I really hope we can follow the progress of your project in the future in some fashion. I'm sure we'll be in touch in some way. There'll be some reverberations. So
yeah, thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share, and also to hear all your input and thoughts. And this is really, interesting and thought-provoking.
Great, thank you. So before we all sign off, just really quickly, I know the time we've taken up a lot of everyone's time. Just to mention a couple of upcoming online events that everyone's welcome to follow online. We'll have the 4th installment of our 2nd semester of the Core in Action program, in which we're reading The Embodied Mind. This is sort of the seminal work here at Mind and Life Europe. And so you're welcome to follow that on our YouTube channel on April 5th. And then we're going to have a special film screening, actually, with the director of a beautiful documentary called Tukdam, Between Worlds, based on the scientific and anthropological investigation of post-death states in a Tibetan Buddhist context. So we're lucky enough to have Donag with us that evening for a discussion. So you're welcome to sign up for that. That'll be on April 12th, which is a Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central European Summertime. So look forward to seeing you soon. And thanks so much again, everyone, for joining us this evening. And thanks to you, Anna, especially.